Gaming Bolt presents 15 brutally difficult games of 2017 that possibly made you cry with anger. There's a pretty big market for games that can crush your soul with their difficulty these days, thanks originally to the popularity of the Dark Souls series. However, not a lot of games do this successfully. Being a ridiculously difficult game is one thing, but doing so while making sure that the player never feels cheated or like the game is being unfair is much harder to accomplish. Thankfully enough, every year we get more new games that fall into that bracket, and 2017 was no different in that regard. In this feature, we're going to take a look at 15 such games. Cuphead. Cuphead has to be one of the best games of the year, without a doubt. Not least because of its unique and beautiful 1930s animations art style. But the one other thing that makes this game as good as it is its challenging difficulty, which is a perfect example of, quote, easy to grasp, hard to master. Even if you die countless times in Cuphead, you never really feel like the game's being unfair, which is why you always keep coming back for more. Wolfenstein II: The New Colossus. Wolfenstein is, in every way, shape, and form, the perfect game for veteran old-school shooter enthusiasts, just like its predecessor. There's no regenerating health, enemy AI is more than competitive, level design is top-notch, and some of the boss fights will give you nightmares. No, The New Colossus isn't a fiendishly difficult game, at least not enough to give you nightmares or anything like that, but it is a game that will challenge you plenty, and one where you will die a lot. The Surge. The Surge is built on the same design and gameplay philosophies as From Software's Soulsborne games, so of course it goes without saying that the game is more than capable of providing a proper challenge. It requires that you learn the movement patterns of your enemies while acclimating yourself to your own abilities, and though it's a bit of a learning curve, once you get used to the mechanics, it can be a really satisfying combat system. There's also some pretty well designed boss fights, and though it'd be an exaggeration to say that they're on the same level as what we see in the Souls games, they're still pretty good in their own right. Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. Naughty Dog's Crash Bandicoot trilogy was notoriously difficult when it came out on the original PlayStation during the late 1990s, and this year's remakes were no different. Developers Vicarious Visions made some smart changes and tweaks to the games to make them less obtuse than they were 2 decades ago. And though it's fair to say that not all those changes worked as well as they should have, Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy still has 3 extremely challenging and, as a result, extremely enjoyable games. Nioh. If there's one thing that can be said about Nioh, it's that it has no problem punishing you harshly. Nioh is a difficult game, even at the best of times, and enemies can often take you out in a single hit. The skilled player will soon learn how to avoid that fate, and even if they fail, they'll know how to avoid it the next time. It's a game that, much like Dark Souls, forces players to tailor their combat style to the enemies that they're facing, rather than encouraging them to progress using nothing but brute force. Dark Souls III: The Ringed City. From Software's Soulsborne series is, of course, the ambassador for modern difficult games, and Dark Souls 3 Ringed City DLC did everything in its power to stay true to that identity. It was a game that was characterized by everything that you usually associated with the quintessential Dark Souls experience. Amazing bosses, challenging combat, excellent level design, and an excellent oppressive atmosphere. If this was indeed the last hurrah for the Souls series, then it was a hell of a way to say goodbye. XCOM 2: War of the Chosen. The XCOM series has always been known for being unforgivingly difficult, and that didn't change with its revival. XCOM 2's War of the Chosen expansion follows that same path as well, providing the same addictive and challenging experience that the series has now become known for. But by that same token, it's got the same pitfalls that XCOM games usually do. The game can often be unfairly difficult at times, such as in instances when attacks with high chances of hitting refuse to land, even from point-blank distances. Hopefully, Firaxis will work on fixing this in the future. The End is Nigh. The End is Nigh draws a lot of inspiration from Super Meat Boy, which makes sense considering that it's supposed to be its spiritual successor. So, as anyone who's played Super Meat Boy may have guessed, it can be an exceptionally challenging game. The End is Nigh demands pinpoint accuracy from players during platforming, and while the game is no walk in the park, its optional achievement-related platforming can really put you through the paces. Rain World. Yeah, Rain World is hard. Very hard. Some might even say it's off-putting. Criticism about enemy placements and respawning are to some extent quite valid, while there's also the argument to be made that the game's level design can be a little obtuse at times. But once you master the game, which does require some lightning-quick reflexes on your part, it turns into an incredibly satisfying and rewarding experience. Nex Machina. Nex Machina is perhaps one of the hardest games even among the 15 that we're mentioning here, and while the lower and normal difficulties aren't a cakewalk to begin with, on hard mode the game is absolutely bonkers. The game also has some pretty challenging boss fights. The final boss, in fact, is difficult enough to bring you to tears. There's no way you can clear that fight in less than 10 attempts. Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight isn't, on the face of it, a very hard game. If all you do is follow the main story, you won't face much of a challenge. It's when you get to the optional stuff that the game's difficulty really starts to ramp up. The optional encounters and boss fights in this game are some of the hardest that we've seen in any game all year, and it's these moments that elevate the game to true greatness. And then of course there's the Trial of Fools. That'll give you nightmares for a good few days. Super Cloudbuilt. This is one of 2017's hidden gems. Though Super Cloudbuilt is not without its flaws, it's been criminally overlooked by a large number of people. The game is a mixture of parkour, exploration, and combat, all at breakneck speeds, and as the very description may have implied, it can be an incredibly challenging experience at times. Due to its very nature, the game begs replays, and even if you keep finding yourself unable to overcome a particular challenge, chances are you'll want to keep coming back for more. Ruiner. Ruiner really is the kind of game that more people need to know about. It's a fast-paced, adrenaline-fueled action shooter, and while that may sound like a pretty generic description in today's day and age, the actual game is anything but generic. It features some excellent combat, which sees you using a variety of very well-built weapons while relying on super quick reflexes. Ruiner's combat system is the kind that pulls you in from the get-go, after which it dawns on you that mastering it is going to be easier said than done, and every second of the ride is an absolute blast. DonPachi Fever On. Technically, DonPachi Fever On is not a 2017 game. It was released originally as an arcade game in 1998, but this year saw it get ported over to the PlayStation 4. DonPachi Fever On is the quintessential arcade shoot-'em-up, characterized by everything you would expect to see in a game of that time and ilk. There's swarms of enemies that are crowding you at all times, and there's bosses that can easily overpower you. It's a game that's designed to be challenging, and that's exactly what makes it as enjoyable as it is. Ys 8, Lacrimosa of Dana. Ys 8 has to be among the better games from the Ys series in recent memory. It's also one that you should definitely try playing if you're looking for a challenge. Though, on normal difficulty, it's not really all that difficult. The higher difficulty level that you choose, the more exponentially tough it gets. On hard, it's fair and challenging, but on Nightmare and Inferno difficulty levels, it can often be hard enough to give you nightmares.
And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at Gaming Vault, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.